Hello, friends, and welcome to Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and help you engage with the Texas Legislature. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and we're coming to you today for what I hope is the last legislative wrap-up edition of 2023. Longtime listeners will know that we usually have content weekly during the regular 140-day legislative session, and then a legislative wrap-up series in the summer after. But this year has been, shall we say, special. We had the 140-day regular session and now 4 30-day special sessions. I heard one news personality say that the part-time Texas Legislature has been in session more than the U.S. Congress this year. I haven't confirmed that, but I bet it's close. And one of the main issues the Texas Legislature has tried to address this year is public school funding. In a year with an historic budget surplus, the Texas Legislature should have been able to better fund our underfunded public schools and give Texas public school teachers a well-deserved raise. Both issues Texans of faith consistently tell us they care about. However, both have been tied up all year because they've been held hostage to state leaders insisting that those priorities would only be funded in exchange for diverting dollars from public schools to private school vouchers. Time and time again, the Texas House said no. And so it looks like we'll end the year with no vouchers, but also no increased funding for public schools and public school teachers. We're going to talk about that and more with Texas Impact's Advocacy Director, Joshua Houston, as we wrap up the 4th special session of the Texas Legislature. Joining us for today's conversation is Texas Impact's Advocacy Director, Joshua Houston. Josh, thanks for joining us.
Hey, good to see you, Scott.
A 140-day regular session, 4 30-day special sessions. I feel like we've had lots of opportunities to do legislative wrap-ups this year, huh?
Oh, my God. Here we are. It's almost Christmas. Don't forget the impeachment, too. It's just been a full year. I do not recall one ever being quite like this. I think it has broken some records.
Well, I'm hoping, no offense to you, but I'm hoping we can get a couple of weeks where I'm not talking to you on a podcast between now and like mid-January or something. That'd be great.
Oh, agreed.
So let's jump in. Public education is the topic of the day. And as we said, it's been a long year between all of these specials. And despite all of that and the enormous budget surplus that the Texas Legislature has had, they have not been able to pass a school funding bill or a teacher pay raise because of the insistence of the governor to hold those hostage in exchange for a school voucher bill. And we've talked about this a couple of times on the program so far, but talk to us about where we landed in the 4th special session on public education. The governor finally got his vote, but it didn't go the way he wanted, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So, yes, we know it because the governor said it. I mean, often in politics, it's not that crystal clear, and it's crystal clear that the governor in the 3rd special session was not even willing to negotiate for more school funding until vouchers was passed. And then he backed off that position. And in the 4th special session had a whole bunch of school funding, teacher pay, special ed money, even standardized testing reform was on the table to try to get the voucher vote done. But there was the vouchers. And so what happened in the 4th special session is that you had a committee hearing. Well, I guess we should back up a little bit and say the Senate did what the Senate often does, which is they pass a bill very quickly because their rules allow them to. And they passed Senate Bill 1, which was the voucher bill. And this time, and this is interesting, they bifurcated the money for public education from the voucher bill and created Senate Bill 1, which was the voucher, and Senate Bill 2, which was more money. And they sent both over to the House pretty instantly. The House then filed their own version, which was House Bill 1. And it was a big, giant 200-page package trying to get a compromise in order to get vouchers through. And so the Capitol chatter, we heard this chatter as the hearing was ongoing that day in the House, was that the bill was going to come out of the committee, which was really not something that's happened in decades, with the support of 4 rural Republicans on that committee, because they looked like they had enough votes to block it. And the rationale for this happening was that there was an agreement to let the bill out of committee, but that there was no obligation for them to vote that way on the floor. That the whole purpose was to give the governor what the governor probably wanted, which was a record vote of the entire House. And that was wanted because of the upcoming primaries, where this is largely going to get settled. Everyone thought, that the vote would go the way it did. But you got to get everybody on record so that it's crystal clear for the voters. And so give the governor his record vote, and maybe we'll get out of our perpetual special sessions.
So the thought coming out of that committee meeting was that on the House floor, they would have a vote to take out the vouchers and potentially vote for the rest of the bill.
That was the plan, correct. Yeah. And so there was 2 reasons to do that. So what would happen is the bill would hit the floor, and there would be an amendment to strip out the voucher, and that would be the record vote. And that part did happen. There was a second part to it too that's going to become important as we tell this story. And that's the thought was, if you pull the voucher out, then you send a school funding bill without vouchers over to the Senate. And the Senate will then have to either pass it or kill it. And then it's clear for the voters that it's the Senate that's holding it hostage. And if the Senate decided, okay, well, we'll pass that one without the voucher, then it would go to the governor. And the governor had publicly said that he would veto any bill that had school funding but not vouchers. And so there was a thought process of, okay, let's call the governor's bluff. But that part didn't happen.
Yeah, so that vote finally came. I think it was the week before Thanksgiving, and Representative John Rainey from Bryan College Station area was the one who brought that. Anything you want to say about that part of the process?
Oh, it was, there was some interesting floor procedure, which is kind of revelatory in a sense that Rainey filed that amendment, but it is ultimately up to the speaker to determine the order of the amendments. And so then it got refiled as an amendment to the amendment on a perfecting amendment. And so that was interesting that that was just kind of an interesting thing to observe as a lobbyist. And we'll just kind of leave it at that. But nevertheless, the vote did happen right up front, pretty early in the debate. There was not going to be any waiting around to determine the thing they were all there to determine. It was 84-63, and that 84 included 21 Republicans, which is 3 less than the number on the Herrero Amendment during the regular session. We actually lost 4 of them, but gained 1, so there was a little bit of shuffling there. And it included all but 1 Democrat, which was not a fait accompli. That was not inevitable. And that 1 Democrat didn't vote for vouchers. He just suddenly had an illness and had to return home to the district. He took a walk. He was absent, I should say. And I'm not making up the illness thing. That was the reason given by the motion to excuse him on that day. That's what was said on the floor. So that's really interesting. What you've got then politically is 21 of the 86 Republicans, I think, that are pro-public education and on the record. And so that will be a major issue in the upcoming Republican primaries, plural, both the March 5th primary and then any runoffs. And then you have it not becoming an issue, by and large, in the Democratic primary, where even Democratic legislators that we were worried about decided not to in any way expose themselves politically on a tough vote and stuck with public education, which is important. That is directly tied to your efforts. All those things, Republicans and Democrats, are directly tied to your efforts to lobby and persuade your state representatives to support public education.
After the vote on the Rainey Amendment, I think there were some questions about what would happen next. Were they going to work through the other 250 or whatever amendments? Was the House going to pass a bill? Talk to our listeners about what happened next.
Yeah, that's right. There was a pause. They stood at ease, and what that usually means is they go to a back room and try to sort it out. Because at that point, and the chatter in the lobby was this: there exist 84 votes to kind of write that funding bill however they wanted to do it. And so this is where it kind of it gets arcane, but it's important. So ultimately, this is where we get to part two, where there was a hope that they would send a funding bill without a voucher to the Senate to try to smoke out for the public who was holding more money for public ed hostage. Because let's remember, there's an unfunded school marshal bill, school armed security officer bill called House Bill 3. Districts did not get any money, or barely any money for that. There's been big time inflation, as we all know, and there's been no additional money for public ed to cover inflation. Then you have special ed that's been underfunded for quite a while, and they need more money for that. So they knew, and this is the public ed community and the public ed legislators, knew that what's going to happen is there's going to be direct mail pieces that go out in their primaries that say, you know, your state representative killed more money or voted against more money for public education. And that's not true. They voted to strip the voucher amendment out. It was the bill author who then decided, and this is the bill author's prerogative, and the bill author in this case was the chair of the committee, Chairman Brad Buckley, decided to do what's called recommitting the bill to committee. And that's just a way to, I mean, it doesn't necessarily kill the bill, but in this case it did. It effectively killed the bill and did not it stopped the whole House from moving forward on the debate about how to fund our schools without vouchers. And so it was interesting. Very few things are clear sometimes in politics, but it was clear that like, oh, wait, it is quite possible the hostage takers just aren't the governor and lieutenant governor, but there actually may be hostage takers in the House too. And that is going to cause some very interesting internal dynamics in the Republican Party on the House side going into the primaries.
So it is clear to you that this was a hostage situation. There wasn't any chance of passing the education funding without the vouchers.
It's sure, I mean, clearly, yes. The question is who and who's responsible. And, it was clear that it was the governor because the governor said so. It was pretty clear that it was true in the Senate because during the regular session, House Bill 100 was a school funding bill that passed the House without vouchers. And it came back from the Senate with a big fat voucher on it. And they were not able to reconcile that in conference committee. So in the regular session, we left the regular session with the Senate being the hostage taker. In the special sessions, the governor said he was a hostage taker. And then lo and behold, when we got to the actual vote in the House, they didn't allow the leadership didn't allow a full debate on a school funding bill that didn't include vouchers. And so what is one to conclude at that point? Again, no one has told us inside information and said this out loud, but also as professional lobbyists, we didn't fall off the turnip truck. We know legislative procedure. So it's hard to see how to conclude otherwise.
Yeah, which is a sad deal because, many, if not most of our listeners are engaged in congregations who do work with local public schools. And we're all hearing from folks about how hard it is there now.
Yes.
And with this giant budget surplus to leave them with nothing is.
There is a budget surplus. There is inflation. There are school districts looking at cutting their budgets. I mean, the whole thing is not a good situation for public education. And actually, we have one last little interesting data point, which was on the very last day so the lieutenant governor has gone into full-blown campaign mode, And, since impeachment has, even before that really, has been kind of full-throated attacking the Speaker of the House. It's out there in public. Go look it up. And that's from the far right, is the angle that's being taken. It's in conjunction with the Tim Dunn and Wilkes Brothers money that supports so many of the candidates in the House. So on that very last day, you had Lieutenant Governor, in a full-throated campaign mode, really attacking the House for the failure to pass the school funding bills. And then you had an interesting thing happen where on the House floor, any member can make what's called a parliamentary inquiry. It's an arcane thing, but nevertheless, they get on the back mic and they ask a question of the Speaker. And Representative Allison, who's a Republican from San Antonio and a pro-public ed Republican, got on the back mic and asked a series of parliamentary inquiries, the gist of which was this. He said, how would one go about making a motion to bypass committee so we could take up Senate Bill 2?
Which is school funding bill, right?
That's right. Senate Bill 2 was the Senate version of school funding minus the voucher. And it was an interesting clip and an interesting exchange where it was a little tense. And the answer, he gave an answer, and Representative Allison asked, would I be recognized for such a motion if I came down front? And the Speaker just said no. And so what that reveals is very arcane, but what it reveals was there was a faction of public ed Republicans that wanted to move a school funding bill and were not being allowed to. And they decided to make it public. At least one of them decided to make it public on that very last day. And that's for primary purposes, right? I mean, they know that there's going to be attack ads that say your state rep voted against more funding for public education. Well, that's not true. And so they wanted to try to, get ahead of that primary narrative, and they weren't being allowed to, essentially. And so that's an interesting dynamic going on in the Texas House on the Republican side going into the primaries.
Yeah, and so until that last day, there was just silence, right? We had our public school defenders meetings. We had rapid response folks asking, like, what's happening? What's happening next? And the response was, we don't know. We wait and see, right? So are we
That's
still
right.
in that stage? I guess the question I'll now pose to you that folks keep asking all of us is, what happens next? Is there going to be another special session? Are they going to try to work something out? Are we settling this in the primaries? Any guess there?
Well, it is certain that this will be settled in the primaries. The next primary season will be existential for the future of public education. I mean, it is getting choked off where inflation, all those things we rattled off, inflation, special ed money, school, armed school, money for school security, it's not coming to them. And things only get worse with time. So on top of that, if it's really a referendum on vouchers, then how that election comes out will tell the next legislature what to do. So the public really needs to understand just how critical for public education the next primary season is. As far as another special, really nobody knows that but the governor, and I'm not even sure that they've decided. 50-50 coin flip, Scott. They could use another special session to amplify the issue in a primary if they felt that was beneficial to them. And the timeline for that most likely would be January, but not necessarily. There's some other options that we won't go into. But the risk of that is that you very well could have a bit of a revolt in the Texas House. And it's unclear who they would revolt against. They could just decide to not show up. 84 of them could say, we've taken our vote, we're not going to show up. And honestly, it's not just the 84 that were for public education. This is where you have to go back to the impeachment and remember that there are a number of Republicans who voted for vouchers who also voted to impeach Ken Paxton, the Attorney General. And that has led to them being primaried from the far right. And so there's chatter from those state representatives that they would be irritated if there was another special session because they've got to go campaign, and they were, loyal to the governor on vouchers. So you've got potentially, 100 or more of the 150 members of the Texas House that could be involved in a massive quorum break. And if that were to happen, then how do you enforce it? And it puts the speaker in a real spot. And if the governor and the speaker are coordinating, and this is speculation, it's but if they are coordinating, it would not behoove the governor to put the speaker in that spot. So that would all argue against calling another special session because it could really out some of the tensions that right now we have deduced but not proven. But, so no, I mean, I think it's pretty 50-50 on what the governor's political people think is most advantageous to them in a primary. And there's no way to know exactly what that is at this time.
Yeah. I feel like it'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to all of the listeners and all of the Texas Impact folks who worked so hard on this issue during the regular session and during the special sessions. Thousands of people signed Texas Impact's public dollars for public schools letter. We have people ordering yard signs. We have people protesting at offices. It seems like that public pressure from local communities worked. And we heard from offices about the impact those letters being dropped off at the offices made, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we heard from staffers in both parties and staffers, frankly, whose legislators were on both sides of the vote, that was the most effective thing that could be done because in a special session where it's clear it's going to go to a primary, it really, as a professional lobbyist, isn't a thing for me. Because there's not a lot of inside baseball, bill language negotiation, work to do. It's convincing legislators that their constituents are A, paying attention, and B, care in a certain way. So it is really a demonstration project. And y'all demonstrated that you are paying attention. This issue is super important to you, and that was unquestionably effective in maintaining that vote of 84 pro public ed votes in the House. And so now you got to go prove it.
And so the next step for those people who did all that work during the legislative session is now to turn your attention towards the primaries, pay attention to the candidates, and start organizing friends in local communities, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You persuaded them that you were with them. Now you have to go be with them. And that means making sure that your candidate that is pro-public education wins in the next election cycle, which is the March primaries. So timeline, you and I are recording, Scott, how many days to Christmas? It's under 2 weeks.
It is under 2 weeks to Christmas, yes.
Yeah, so we're going to hit Christmas. We're going to hit the New Year. And then they're going to be on the campaign trail. And they'll be on the campaign trail for roughly 6 weeks before early voting starts. And shortly after Valentine's Day, we will begin early voting, and they'll be in get out the vote mode. So that is your timeline. So when you are with family for Christmas, if you have friends, especially in rural Texas, it is important to the extent you're able, and you're well-socialized people and you know your families and friends the best, but it is important nevertheless to try to make sure they understand what's at stake for public education. And I'll tell you, I've had conversations with people all over the political spectrum. This one's really not cutting down party lines. It's really not cutting down, there's people who support public education in both parties with all sorts of other political views. And it has been really interesting to talk to folks about, they're considering a bill that would divert money from the public schools in order to create an entitlement welfare program for wealthy suburbanites. And they look at you like you're crazy. Like, no, I'm dead serious. I mean, here's what a voucher is. It's when you take money out of the public school system and hand it to a family who already has their kid in private school. It doesn't have to be that way, but the proposals we talked about in the Texas Legislature are. And, they're already in private school, and you're handing them a check for $10,000. And here's the thing, is that the state is only writing a check for $6,000, just under $6,200 for your kid in the public school. But they want to give a $10,000 check to somebody who's already paying for their kid to be in private school. And they want to take it out of the public school that your kid's in. That's what we're talking about. And the more people look at this, the more people understand what a voucher is, the more they turn against it. And so it is important that we make sure the public really understands what's at stake, really understands that the March primary is the most important election in Texas, and really understands that this is the issue that is going to be the issue in that March primary. And what they do in that March primary will have ramifications for what happens in the 2025 legislative session.
I think that is a great place to leave it. I am just picturing Josh sitting around his holiday table breaking down voucher numbers. So that's given me some joy today. I really do hope you, in addition to fighting with folks around your holiday table, do find some time for some rest and relaxation, but appreciate the time today.
Thanks, Scott. It's good to see you.
I'd like to thank Josh for the time and thank you for tuning in. Even if the legislature didn't always make life feel easy, we appreciate you being a part of this journey with us in 2023. We love hearing from our audience, and it's always great to be out on the road and hear from you, our loyal listeners. The road to justice and equity in Texas feels long, but we love walking on this journey with you all. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season, and we look forward to resourcing you and your advocacy work during what I predict will be a busy and stressful 2024. So I hope you enjoy some rest and find meaning and hope during this holiday season as we prepare for that busy year. As always, Texas Impact has tools for you to get involved now and in the year to come. Check out texasimpact.org for resources and opportunities, and consider joining one of our teams. While you're there, I hope you'll consider joining Texas Impact to support this podcast and the work of Texas Impact year-round. If you ever have questions or need additional information, you can always reach out to me directly at scott@texasimpact.org for more. So with that, I think it's time to close out this episode. So remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.